The air in the port of Savannah, Georgia, was thick with the scent of salt, diesel, and rotting fish. It was a place of massive iron giants, towering cranes that reached into the humid sky like the skeletons of prehistoric beasts. Every night, thousands of shipping containers were moved across the asphalt, a never-ending dance of global commerce. But beneath the flashing LED lights and the roar of semi-trucks, a different kind of commerce was thriving. The port of Savannah was a hub of shadows, controlled by Julian Sterling, the CEO of Atlantic Global Logistics. Sterling was a man who viewed the law as a mere suggestion and the city's dockworkers as disposable tools. Into this world of rust and corruption walked a woman who called herself Clara. She wore oversized, grease-stained denim overalls, a faded baseball cap pulled low over her eyes, and boots that looked like they had seen 100 miles of hard road. She had applied for a job as a night shift maintenance mechanic, a position that involved crawling into the grimy guts of the massive forklifts and repair engines that no one else wanted to touch. To the men who ran the docks, Clara was invisible. She was the quiet girl who ate her lunch alone on a rusted pier, looking out at the Atlantic Ocean with eyes that seemed far too old for her face. Julian Sterling's son, a man named Victor who acted as the port's operations manager, took a particular pleasure in making Clara's life difficult. Victor was a man born with a silver spoon and a hollow heart. He would intentionally break hydraulic lines or spill gallons of oil in her workspace, laughing as he watched her kneel in the muck to clean it up. He called her Grease Monkey and mocked her for being a woman in a man's yard, telling his men that she was only there because the company needed to meet a diversity quota. He thought she was a victim, a desperate soul clinging to a low-wage job. He had no idea that he was looking at the most dangerous woman ever produced by the United States Navy. The reality was that Clara was actually Commander Clara Riptide Brooks, a former Navy SEAL and a veteran of the elite Special Missions Group. She was a ghost, a woman whose name was spoken in hushed tones in the corridors of the Pentagon. She had been sent to Savannah because Atlantic Global Logistics was suspected of moving more than just car parts and electronics. Intelligence suggested that Sterling was using his shipping empire to facilitate a massive human trafficking ring, bringing in people from across the globe and disappearing them into the American underground. Clara wasn't there to fix engines. She was there to find the logistics ledger, the digital heart of Sterling's illegal operation. For 2 months, she had played the role of the humble mechanic, her hands calloused and blackened by grease, while her mind recorded every shipment, every unmarked vessel, and every bribe paid to the local police. The investigation took a dark turn during a particularly stormy night in July. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the dockyards into a labyrinth of gray shadows. Clara was working on a malfunctioning generator near Dock 17, a restricted area that was officially closed for repairs. Through the haze of the storm, she saw a blacked-out freighter slip into the berth without its transponder active. She watched from the shadows of a crane as Victor Sterling and a group of armed mercenaries, men who looked like they belonged on a battlefield, not a commercial dock, began offloading a series of specialized ventilation containers. As the doors opened, Clara heard the faint, terrified whimpers of people inside. Her blood turned to ice. She had spent her life fighting for freedom on foreign shores, and now she was seeing the most horrific kind of slavery happening on her own soil. Clara knew she couldn't call the local authorities. She had already documented the local sheriff's car parked at Julian Sterling's estate every Sunday. She was on her own. She began to move, her mechanic walk disappearing and being replaced by the silent, predatory glide of a Tier 1 operator. She used the rain and the darkness as her camouflage, slipping past the thermal sensors she had mapped weeks ago. She reached the containers and saw a young girl, no older than 10, staring through a small grated window with eyes full of hopelessness. Clara placed a finger to her lips, a silent promise of protection that the girl seemed to understand instantly. But as Clara was preparing to extract the location data from the freighter's bridge, a flashlight beam cut through the dark. Victor Sterling had returned, and he wasn't alone. Well, if it isn't the Grease Monkey, Victor sneered, his voice dripping with arrogance. He was flanked by 3 large men carrying submachine guns. He had noticed Clara's absence from her assigned station and had decided to hunt her down. He thought he had caught a spy, a weak girl who had poked her nose where it didn't belong. He told his men to take her to the warehouse so they could find out who she was working with. He even mocked her one last time, telling her that she should have stayed in the kitchen where it was safe. Clara didn't say a word. She allowed them to zip-tie her hands and lead her toward the massive, dimly lit warehouse at the end of the pier. She needed to get inside that building. It was where the master server was kept. They weren't capturing her. They were giving her an escort to her objective. The warehouse was a cavernous space filled with crates and the smell of ozone. Victor had Clara shoved into a chair in the center of the room, while Julian, Sterling himself, stepped out of the shadows. Julian was an older man, polished and cold, looking at Clara as if she were a piece of defective equipment. He told her that he had spent 30 years building his empire, and he wouldn't let a nobody ruin it. He signaled to one of his men, a massive brute named Miller, to break her spirit. Miller stepped forward, pulling a heavy tactical knife from his belt. He leaned in close, telling Clara that she was going to regret ever coming to Savannah. In that moment, the air in the room seemed to change. The temperature dropped, and a crushing sense of dread filled the space. Clara looked up, and for the first time, Julian and Victor saw her eyes clearly. They weren't the eyes of a mechanic. They were the eyes of the deep ocean, cold, vast, and capable of crushing anything that fell into them. Clara gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. With a sudden, explosive movement, she snapped the zip ties, a trick she had learned in a clandestine training camp years ago, and grabbed Miller's wrist before he could even blink. The sound of his radius snapping was like a gunshot in the silent warehouse. Before the other guards could react, Clara had used Miller's own knife to disable his primary tendons and was already moving toward the first armed guard. The battle that followed was a masterclass in tactical violence. Clara didn't fight like a civilian. She fought like a force of nature. She used the darkness of the warehouse rafters and the stacks of crates to dismantle the mercenaries. She didn't need a gun. She used their own weapons against them. Every time a guard turned a corner, she was there, a shadow that struck with the force of a tidal wave. She moved with a fluidity that left Julian Sterling frozen in shock. He watched his elite security team, men he paid thousands of dollars a month, get systematically destroyed by a woman he had thought was beneath his notice. Victor tried to run for the exit, but Clara was faster. She delivered a crushing kick to his knee that sent him screaming to the floor, then turned her attention to the main server. As she initiated the final data upload to a secure Navy frequency, the warehouse doors burst open. Julian had managed to call in his secondary security team, 12 men in full tactical gear, armed with assault rifles. They formed a perimeter, their laser sights dancing across the crates. Julian, hidden behind a bulletproof glass office, screamed for them to kill the bitch. But Clara had already anticipated the move. She had spent her weeks as a mechanic repairing the warehouse's fire suppression system. In reality, she had filled the pipes with a highly pressurized, non-lethal, incapacitating gas. She pulled a small remote from her boot and pressed the button. The warehouse was instantly filled with a thick, white fog that blinded the guards and clogged their lungs. In the whiteout conditions, Clara was the only one who could see. She had donned a pair of low-profile thermal lenses and moved through the gasping guards like a reaper through a wheat field. She didn't kill unless she had to, instead focusing on disabling their weapons and leaving them unconscious in the fog. She reached Julian's office and shattered the glass with a specialized breaching charge. Julian stood there, his face pale, his empire crumbling around him. He tried to offer her millions, telling her she could have a seat at his table. Clara didn't even acknowledge the offer. She looked at the progress bar on her wrist-mounted computer, 100%. The logistics ledger was now in the hands of the U.S. Navy and the FBI. "The table is being burned down, Julian," Clara said, her voice a calm, steady rhythm that was more terrifying than a shout. "And you're going to be the one left in the ashes." She didn't wait for his response. She neutralized him with a single precise strike and walked back out into the dockyard. The storm was still raging, but the air felt cleaner. In the distance, she could hear the rhythmic thump of heavy-lift helicopters and the wail of sirens. The Iron Harbor was finally being breached by the real law. As the sun began to rise over the Savannah River, the port was swarmed by hundreds of federal agents and Navy personnel. The blacked-out freighter was seized, and the people inside the containers were finally being brought out into the light, given medical care and a promise of a new life. Victor and Julian Sterling were led away in shackles, their faces splashed across every news channel in the country. The story of the Savannah slave ring was the biggest news of the decade, and the public was calling for the heads of every politician and police officer who had taken a bribe. But amidst the chaos of the investigation, the quiet mechanic had disappeared. The foreman of the docks, a man who had actually been kind to Clara, found her locker empty. The only thing left behind was a small, hand-drawn map of the facility's hidden maintenance tunnels and a note that read, "The engines are fixed. Keep the yard clean." He looked out at the ocean, wondering who she really was and where she had gone. He remembered the way she had looked at the horizon and realized that she had never been a nobody. She had been a guardian, a silent warrior who had walked through the filth to bring back the light. Clara was already 50 miles away, driving a different truck and wearing a different face. She was heading toward a military airbase in South Carolina, where a transport was waiting to take her to her next assignment. She sat in a small roadside diner, drinking a cup of bitter coffee and reading the news on her tablet. She saw the images of the liberated children and felt a small, fleeting sense of peace. But she knew that Savannah was just one port and Sterling was just one monster. There were other shadows that needed to be hunted, other nobodies who needed a champion. Her phone buzzed with an encrypted message. Riptide, target acquired. New York City. A pharmaceutical firm is testing on veterans. They need a night janitor. Clara closed the message and stood up, leaving a $20 bill on the table. She adjusted her cap and walked out into the bright morning sun. To the people in the diner, she was just another woman on a road trip, someone they would forget by the time they finished their breakfast. But as she pulled onto the highway, the commander was already calculating her approach. The janitor of New York was coming, and the world was about to find out that no matter how deep the shadow, the riptide always finds its way in. The legacy of the Savannah docks changed that day. The workers organized, the corrupt officials were purged, and the Iron Harbor became a symbol of what happens when the powerful forget that the people they look down upon are the ones who truly hold the world together. They never forgot the girl in the grease-stained overalls. They told her story to every new recruit, a warning to the arrogant and a hope for the oppressed. They called her the ghost of the pier, a reminder that justice doesn't always come with a badge and a siren. Sometimes it comes with a wrench, a silent stare, and a heart that will never, ever back down. As Clara drove north, the skyscrapers of the world's most powerful cities began to loom on the horizon. She didn't look back at the life she had left behind. She only looked forward toward the next battle, the next person who thought they were untouchable. She was the reaper in the rafters, the ghost in the machine, and the woman who proved that silence isn't a lack of power. It's the ultimate preparation. The road was long, and the enemies were many, but Clara Riptide Brooks had a full tank of gas and a lifetime of training. And she was just getting started.